to the Badaboom podcast. This is Troy.
And this is Chris.
Today we are talking about the anniversary of the Snyder Cut being released for Justice League. I didn't think it was going to happen, and it's one of those things where it's like Paul Rudd at Hot Ones. Who would have thought? Not me, but here we are.
Here we are. Look at us. Yeah, for sure. And for years, you think it's like one of those things that obviously people were talking about. The way they talked about it, it almost felt like it existed. They just needed to release it. And it's great that we were able to get something that was not just like an extended cut of what the theatrical version was, but a completely different movie and a 4-hour movie at that, which is amazing. I watched it a couple times. I think in terms of Zack Snyder's DC work, it's his best film. It's the most hopeful one. And it's one I'm kind of always going back to and I don't have much complaints about.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when Sonic the Hedgehog was getting all that pushback of like, oh, you should redesign him. And then Paramount Pictures was like, yeah, we'll listen to you. And then I feel like that totally channels like, yeah, let's listen to the fans and let's get the Snyder Cut out there. And I'm really glad they did, because on a scale of 1 to 10, I don't know about you, but for the Joss Whedon cut, I'm like maybe a 3 or a 4. And that's like prior to even seeing Zack Snyder's, there's just like little things in it that I'm like, I'm glad we got Justice League. It's the first version, at least. We had to have it to get the Snyder Cut because of just the situations around Zack's life and whatnot. But it's one of those things where like, yeah, I'm just kind of glad to have it. Was it the best thing? No, it wasn't. But that's why I'm so grateful that we eventually got the Snyder Cut. What about you, man? I know it's hard to compare them because there's big vastness between them, but
for me, watching the first one, it was very much that kid in me. Like, when I used to watch a movie like Elektra or Daredevil, the Ben Affleck and Jennifer Garner one, where I was like, oh, I don't get many of these, so I should just be happy that this exists. And that's what Justice League was like. Oh, I've never seen a big screen Flash. I've never seen a big screen Cyborg. So this I have to be grateful for. And I think when I saw it in theaters the first time, thought it was okay. I probably at the time thought it was like a 5 or 6. But, watching the Snyder Cut, you watch it and you're like, why would they cut what they cut to shoot that? You know what I mean? It's not like they just trimmed it, but they shot worse versions of scenes that were in the original cut. And I think for me, it's made the movie worse, on top of the fact that kind of what went on set. And it was a terrible and miserable experience for everyone involved. It made Ben Affleck go like, you know what, this Batman thing, I don't want to do it anymore. So for me, now, like before it was probably like a 5 or 6, and now it's kind of like more of like a 2.
Oh, dang.
And the 2, it's like the SAT where you get points for writing your name down. It's like the 2 is because it's called Justice League.
Yeah, Joss's Cut is kind of like, to me, when you're doing a group project in school and the day where you all have to meet up together and get stuff done. You've done all the work and you've got all the materials, but you're sick. So you forward it to the person that's going to take it over for you. And then they just are like, what's this mess you kind of came out with?
Yeah. And it's like you gave it to someone that was the complete opposite of you in terms of like how they feel they need to be doing things and stuff. So the less said about that movie, the better, I'd say. I think it's time for us to move on to the Snyder Cut.
Yeah. So, dude, it's 4 hours. So there's plenty of things you can pick apart and be like, oh, that part was cool. And I think I remember reading somewhere like 36% of the movie is actually in slow-mo. But what was your favorite part of the Zack Snyder Cut out of the 4 hours? Like, if there's like 1 or 2 scenes, what's that favorite part?
When Flash, taps into the Speed Force to go back in time and tap the mother box. I think that was just like such a cool moment for me, again, being a Flash fan and seeing, a big live action Flash. That was just super dope. And I think, for a couple years, seeing those Quicksilver scenes in the X-Men movies, I was always like, man, like I can't wait to see what the Flash can do. And I think Zack's visual taste and kind of like the way he approached it. Would I have loved to see the red and yellow lightning? Yes, but to see the Speed Force, kind of like him tap into it, him break that one rule as he's kind of like talking to his dad and being like, "Hey, like I was one of the good ones. I am somebody." It was just one of those cool moments, and a moment I wish that I had been able to see in a theater. You know, as much as I invested in my really nice TV and stuff, that's like one of those like cheer in theater moments that I wish I had gotten to see in theaters. And I think for that, that's like a scene, but the movie does a really good job of like fleshing out all of these characters. Whereas, you know, in a theatrical cut, you watch it, you're like, why is anyone here? It seems like they just showed up. They don't like each other. There's no context to anything. But watching the 4 hours, it definitely felt like it needed to be 4 hours.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely feel like the glue of why the team is there and why the team is made is there for sure. The Snyder cut. And for me, I've got to contribute to that a lot to Cyborg. I'm definitely there with you on the Flash scene, but my favorite part of the movie is actually seeing more of Cyborg and the part where he kind of realizes more and more of his abilities and is able to like give that mom and kid money by kind of hacking the ATM. I'm like, dude, that's so cool. Like that's a very high powered function of Cyborg we haven't really got to see. And we have so much great technology when it comes to movies now. And we're using it in the right scene for Cyborg. And I thought that was great because we have, like you said, this is the first time we've seen Cyborg on the screen and we're going like full out, not Transformers, but we're using that like that same kind of technology kind of vibe for a superhero that we haven't. But yeah, we've seen it maybe in Iron Man and different things like that. But the Cyborg one was just different and definitely new for DC. So his story kind of really was the glue that kind of brought more of the characters together, especially with the death of his father.
Yeah, you know, there was some really heroic moments for Cyborg, and he was giving much more of a complete story. And it sucks because, you know, in the theatrical cut, like if that was like your first taste of Cyborg outside of the Teen Titans, you're like, he doesn't belong here? Yeah, he
He
doesn't
doesn't
need
need
to
to be
be
here.
here, all of those things. But then when you watch the Snyder cut, you're like, oh, he does belong. He does need to be here. He is on the level of these heroes. Whereas, like, the rest of the team almost feels like godlike in their abilities and their capabilities. And in this version of the movie, Cyborg is arguably the most powerful because he kind of knows what's going on with the mother boxes. He can tap into the infrastructure of the world, control nukes, you know, change his body to adapt to the fighting situation or whatever situation he's in, whether it be to hack into something or fight Superman. So there's all those cool things. And I think it really speaks to the way Zach approached this movie. Cause I think in the other DC stuff, sometimes things may have not been like so clear. And because his ideas were so big, maybe all of these movies should have been 4 hours. But the fact that it is 4 hours gives him the time to kind of like create this whole story. And kind of talking about like what's cut out, like what I really like too is how in Batman versus Superman, it's like, why is this guy like a sick murderer? And in Justice League, it does show Zach was thinking like, hey, like Superman would inspire him to come back to the light. You know, in Batman versus Superman, he's in this very dark place where, you know, he feels he has to be brutal and vengeful and all that. Whereas in Justice League, he feels like he has to be hopeful to bring this team together to stop what's coming. And that was a really cool moment. And I think because it's 4 hours, it's able to have these big stories for almost every character.
Yeah, and keep in mind that the Bat flick that we got, he's been in Gotham for like 20 years being Batman. And he's definitely at that stage of being bitter and over everything. Like that arc you just painted, I'm sure that would have happened if with part two and whatnot, because Justice League originally was going to be a TV series, or not a TV series, but like multiple episodes. Each episode's like an hour and a half or so. You know, I mean, that's what he wanted to do. That's what he originally wanted to do for Watchmen. Like you said, the big idea is, yeah, we make a lot of money on it in the movies, but if it's the bigger idea, the harder it is to compress it without losing the focus of what that goal is.
Yeah, I think it worked out the way it was supposed to in terms of like the reason the I think he pitched it as a TV show to kind of give the studio and HBO Max a way to kind of like stretch out this content versus like one project and kind of like space it out. But everything with this movie kind of almost feels like fate. This movie, this version of the movie only exists because really because of COVID, because of how bad the AT&T and Warner merger was going. They needed something to get subscribers, but because of COVID, they couldn't shoot anything new. So they had this project that clearly people were willing to pay for, where they were like, hey, like if we gave you an extra $70 million, what can you do? And I think, in his head, he probably was like, oh, like I could pitch it as this. And then I think ultimately he wanted like that full for, he wanted it in the black and white, which we got to with the Justice is Gray version. But it was cool to see like it happened this way because it felt like it needed to happen that way. Another reason the TV show version of it didn't really happen with the episodes was because if they did it that way, they would have to renegotiate all the actors' contracts because technically they had signed up for a movie.
Yeah.
And I think in most cases, if they didn't come back for any like additional photography or ADR, they didn't get paid anything extra. So if they turned it into a TV series, they would have been like, I'm calling my agent.
Yeah, because there's like sync opportunities and like the reruns and all that stuff. Like if it ever went to television or anything like that, for within the life of streaming, they're probably going to get paid like a certain amount per stream if it was more of a TV series. I'm glad it turned out the way it did for the movie. There's one character in the movie that definitely got more of for sure. We talked about the Flash and the Cyborg, but we got a lot more of Darkseid in the Snyder Cut. And it's kind of unfair to sometimes compare him to Thanos in the MCU, but he is like one of the big bad, if not the baddest villains in the DC universe. Do you feel like they did a good way of like portraying him or like setting him up and like the way they kind of just had him in the movie?
For me, I thought like he looked great. He sounded great. The motivation kind of lacked in the movie for me. I think that's like in the 4-hour movie, that's kind of like one of the like weird plot holes to me. Like it didn't make sense that the one place he got defeated at, he just wouldn't remember where it was or would never come back. Because the idea in the movie is like, oh, like, Kryptonian died. So there's no protector and there's no lanterns or whatever. But Clark didn't arrive as the Superman until like 2 years ago in the movie time. So it's like all those years, like why, like, again, that's like what I felt like when I, rewatch the movie, it's always like this sticking out point where I'm like, well, if you're such a badass, why can't you remember where you got defeated? I feel like that would stick in your mind forever. But it was cool. Like, I think in the original cut, kind of seeing Steppenwolf in that scene was like awkward. One, because the CGI was terrible. Like him as a character kind of made no sense in that movie. Whereas in this one, him being this guy that's obviously owes a debt to Darkseid for something he did. I thought that was cool. His design is way better, which isn't saying much because I think Steppenwolf in the theatrical cut is probably like one of the worst CG characters you would see as a main villain in a movie that costs close to $300 million. But I like Darkseid. And we talk about this a lot. It is no secret we're DC fans. Just seeing him and seeing how imposing he was. I really liked when they showed that nightmare timeline of like him killing Aquaman, Wonder Woman, like just seeing how badass he was, those Omega beams coming out. That was really cool. And I can't complain about like the visual aspects of it because I think, Zach did a really good job. But for me, like the whole, this is where Anti-Life was at the end. Now I'm going to ready the Armada and go over there and get it myself. It's like, dude, you've had like thousands upon thousands of years to come back here, if not millions, to come back here. And if they had kept their original plan to put, Green Lantern at the end versus like Martian Manhunter, well, it isn't the original plan, but
one of the
that's
plans.
Something, one of the plans that Zach wanted to do for the fans. That's BS because yes, it does have a lantern. Then, so it does have protectors. So again, those are kind of like the little things where, like when you watch a 4-hour movie, you're like, oh, this doesn't quite make sense to me. But overall, Darkseid was dope. I never really seen or heard. I think his name is Ray Porter that plays him or voices him. I thought his voice was like really badass. It would have been like amazing if they had figured out a way, well, not figure out a way. I'm sure if they called him, he would have been like, yeah. If they had brought back Michael Ironside from the Superman, the animated series to voice Darkseid, that would have, I don't care about the plot. If he was voicing him, 10 out of 10.
Yeah, I think that would have definitely been like the nostalgia factor that would have like floored everybody. Like, I mean, if Kevin Conroy shows up in the Flash movie somehow, like people are going to go batshit crazy, just like how when I'm something of a scientist happens in No Way Home, people are like, ah.
Yeah.
But for me, I did like the fact that we did get to see Darkseid. I think it was more of a statement about Zack Snyder or maybe the DC movies as a whole than kind of what we got. But I prefer how we have more, I don't want to say humanistic features. I would say more realistic features in some villains that are CGI'd. Like if you took a look at like Thanos or even Hulk, like it's actors wearing a suit and they're walking around and like you can tell the details on their faces and they have those humanistic characters for them. And Darkseid definitely isn't human, and maybe that's why they tried to CGI him the way they did, but it kind of makes it feel less able to kind of buy into some of the fantasy or the lore if it's all completely unrealistic. If there's a little bit of like, hey, I can totally tell like that's a certain part of his face and here's like these facial features that look a little familiar, then you can buy into it a little bit more. And that's what I miss from Darkseid, of being like, you don't look just like a basic CGI character, which they totally did a better job with Steppenwolf on that. But I wanted to have more familiarity in how they made him to make it be like, yeah, that's definitely scary and definitely a big bad villain, because I can see some familiarity of like what's real.
I don't know. I think I used to get a little bit more upset about it because I think Jack Kirby's, vision of the New Gods is so colorful and bright. And, he was a visionary and was able to lay out these amazing designs. Even like the mother box looks terrible. It's just a box that kind of like goes into like different shapes and forms. Whereas like in the comics, it almost looks like a phone with like buttons on it. And, it has those little circles and, the crackle and stuff like that, which you got with like the boom tubes.
Maybe we would have got that design in the second one.
I don't think so. That's kind of like why I'm kind of happy. Like we got this version. Like when it comes to the New Gods, I would love like a more Jack Kirby inspired like look with that stuff. But, I think the way Zach approached it with this, it makes more sense in this world if the Justice League is, a group of superheroes that are almost godlike. It almost feels like they have to slay monsters, So the fact that Darkseid is really imposing and, Apocalypse looks like hell, Steppenwolf looks like a demon, that you'd fight in Doom. Like it makes sense for this version of the Justice League. But for me, I would really love like something like you said that kind of gears towards more like fantastical, where you have like these human like features where you could kind of see the actor's performance more. With Steppenwolf and Darkseid, I felt like the voices were like, even though the actors were mocapped and stuff like that, it's not like a Andy Serkis in Planet of the Apes. Like I'm not seeing like their performance in their eyes. It's like they just have to be big and intimidating.
Yeah, and like that's just like a difference in like CGI. That's just a difference in vision, because even the entire Justice League movie, a lot of it is kind of shot on a green screen and they're digitally recreating everything. They're not necessarily even using like a blue screen like some of the Marvel movies do to kind of put some realistic skylines in the background. It's a lot of it's like, yeah, we're going to make this from the ground up. And part of that does create some really cool effects, like the Flash run sequence. Like that's so cool. But I'm pretty confident you would only be able to really do that around a green screen.
No, what was awesome too was like, Zack Snyder, he shot the like Green Lantern cameo that he planned to put into the movie in his driveway. Like, like, so he's you give that man a camera, he's going to make it work.
He's a DIY master.
Yeah, he's a filmmaker in every sense of the word, which speaks to his vision. And it's so dope that he was able to do this. Obviously the fans really fought for it by raising awareness around suicide. Obviously, that really affected his family and why part of the reason he had to step off of the movie. So it was good to see him like play into a lot of things, give back to the community and his fans, because I think there's some parts in the movie where you clearly see he's trying to like give people what they want. I don't think this version of the Snyder Cut would have been the version that came out in 2017 had he stayed on that movie and had they even given him like creative control. I think the fan response and kind of like their campaigning to make this happen is why we got Jared Leto's Joker at the end of the movie. Why, he tried to put in a Green Lantern cameo. He wanted to give the fans everything.
It's kind of like a Kanye moment. If he had stayed on, what would we got? I guess we'll never know. But we might get something cool in the future with the Flash movie coming out and with things happening in that movie. Would you want to have us kind of pick up the Snyderverse again with the acquisition of Warner Brothers through Discovery? Maybe reset all of it with the Flash and kind of continue down this new timeline, or just kind of start over brand new and make something totally new actors, new casting, new everything after the Flash movie?
I don't know. I just wanted to get started. Like, I feel like,
Yeah,
we've waited so long for this, connected universe to get started. And it's crazy. The closest thing we've gotten to it is a Peacemaker show, which, had that cameo at the end and, made a lot of funny references to the larger DCEU. I just wanted to get started. We talked about this on the delays and stuff like that. The frustrating part is like, I'm glad there's spending more time on the movie to make sure the effects are great, make sure the story's right. But, at this point, like, how long have we been waiting for a Flash movie? And it's not really a Flash movie. It's more like a Justice League light movie, a way to reset the timeline with all these characters and stuff like that. So I just want these movies to get started. In terms of like starting new with new cast and stuff like that, I think that would be interesting. With the Batman coming out, it shows like the filmmaker approach that DC always had works, giving someone like complete control to create a story, and these things don't have to connect. Now with this new Batman movie, they could create a whole universe around Batman stuff. Now they have a Penguin show. They're making a Riddler comic. So like all these characters can really stand on their own. So they don't necessarily have to chase what Marvel's doing to be successful. So I would actually like that approach. And what's tough about that approach is I do think there's a lot of good things from the Snyderverse that have continued. Like we wouldn't have gotten Jason Momoa's Aquaman. We wouldn't get this version of the Flashpoint without Snyder. But, there's things from that universe that we never got to see that I would love to see still, like Ben Affleck's Batman. I would love to see a Deathstroke movie. I would love to see Lex Luthor's next appearance. I thought that was another interesting twist in that movie, which speaks to kind of like what his plan was looking to be, where it's like, hey, he wasn't Lex Luthor yet. It took him going to Arkham Asylum. It took him going to prison to become a better criminal. And I thought that was a very interesting take, because at the end, when you see that scene where he's on the boat, he's got the bald head, the suit, the girls on the super yacht. And it's like, hey, like what is going on? He's like, like I'm a little enlightened, nothing like a little stint in Arkham. So there's some interesting things that could have happened. But, if this is the last time we kind of see like a Snyderverse proper, or it's like purely Zack Snyder's influence and vision, I'm completely happy with this 4-hour gift. It really is a gift. Like as much as I would want more, it's like, it's crazy that it even exists. And not only does it exist, but I get to watch it every day if I wanted to.
Yeah, it is. And we'll be looking forward to what we can get in the future. And like you said, it just got to get started. And if you're listening for the first time, you can definitely get started by subscribing to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen, and check out for new episodes almost weekly. And until then, we'll see you later. Bada boom.
Bada boom.